I want to tell you about a night I still think about. I was sitting on the bathroom floor, not dramatically, just the tiles were cool and I needed that, scrolling back through months of messages on my phone. And what I noticed, when I finally let myself actually look, was this. Every single conversation started with me. Every single one. I was the one who reached out. I was the one who bridged the silence. I was the one who checked in, followed up, gently nudged, warmly offered. And when I saw that pattern laid out like that, dozens of conversations all beginning with my name, I felt something I didn't expect. Not sadness, something more like grief. Because I realized that somewhere underneath all that reaching, I'd been quietly hoping that if I just kept showing up, eventually they would too. That if I loved loudly enough and consistently enough, something in them would finally unlock and they'd reach for me first. That's the hope I want to talk to you about today. Because here's what I've come to understand. After living inside this dynamic and sitting with hundreds of people who've lived inside it too, the question most people are asking isn't actually the right question. Most people are asking, what do I say to get them to initiate? Or, how do I act so they finally reach out? But both of those questions, as understandable as they are still questions about performance. They're still you trying to figure out the right move to make an avoidant person do something. And that framing keeps you stuck in a loop that will exhaust you before it ever changes them. The right question, the one almost nobody asks, is this. What is it in me that keeps waiting? Let me slow down here, because I think this part actually matters. Researchers who study attachment describe something called deactivating strategies. These are the automatic ways an avoidant person suppresses their attachment needs to maintain emotional distance and protect themselves from the vulnerability of closeness. And here's the part that gets missed in almost every conversation about avoidant people. These strategies are triggered when the attachment system is activated, meaning the closer someone gets, the more the avoidant nervous system experiences that closeness is a threat, not a choice, a threat, a genuine biological below-the-surface alarm. Avoidant attachment often comes from early experiences where expressing emotions or seeking comfort led to rejection or neglect. Kids learn to suppress those needs as a way to protect themselves, and that pattern just follows them into adulthood. It becomes the default. So what this means is, when you're loving an avoidant person beautifully, when you're showing up consistently, being patient, being warm, their nervous system isn't registering that as safe. Part of it is registering it as pressure, not because you're doing anything wrong, because their system was wired, a long time before they ever met you, to interpret closeness as danger. I had to sit with that for a long time before it stopped feeling like a personal verdict on my love. Now, here's where the timeline matters. Because what I want to walk you through isn't just what an avoidant person does, but what happens at each stage, in them and in you, and where the turning point actually lives. Because there is one. It's just not where most people are looking. Stage 1 is what I call the performance stage. This is where you are, or where you were, or where you keep returning to. This is the stage where you're adjusting yourself, softening your edges, learning their patterns, trying to calibrate your behavior so the closeness feels less threatening. You become more understanding, more patient. You pick up books about avoidant attachment. You watch videos about nervous system regulation. You genuinely try to become the kind of presence that would feel safe enough for them to move toward. And honestly, there's real love in that. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But here's the thing nobody talks about. When one partner bids for closeness, the other partner's need for distance increases, and that distance in turn increases the first partner's bid for closeness. It's called protest deactivate behavior, a self-reinforcing loop where each person's coping strategy becomes the direct trigger for the others. It escalates on its own. Neither person intends it, which means, and I want you to actually feel this, the more you pursue, the more you're neurologically and relationally confirming exactly what their system already believes. That closeness is something to manage. That love requires bracing for impact. That intimacy is a pressure to be tolerated rather than a safety to move toward. You're not the cause of their avoidance. Please hear that. But your pursuit, however loving, can maintain the conditions that keep their avoidance in place. Stage 2 is what I call the depletion stage. This is when the performance starts costing you more than you can afford. You feel it in your body. You're tired in a way that sleep doesn't touch. You start to notice you've been editing yourself for so long, you can't quite remember what the unedited version sounds like. You've become fluent in their silences and moods and rhythms, but somewhere in the process of learning their language, you forgot to stay fluent in your own. When deactivating strategies go unexamined, relationships start to feel shallow or unstable. Emotional intimacy gets limited, not because it isn't wanted, but because it keeps triggering withdrawal. For the avoidant partner, that can mean a creeping loneliness, or a belief that relationships are just inherently suffocating. For you, it usually means self-doubt, exhaustion, quietly wondering what's wrong with you. And this is the moment most people get completely wrong. Most people at the depletion stage do one of two things. They escalate, push harder, have the big conversation, make their needs so visible it can't be ignored, and the avoidant retreats further. Or they collapse inward and go quiet in a way that's less about self-respect and more about giving up. Both responses, as understandable as they are, miss the thing that's actually available in this moment. What's actually available, if you let yourself reach for it, is something much rarer. It's the beginning of clarity. Stage 3 is what I call the reclamation stage. I want to be careful here because I know this word gets used like a shortcut. Like just choose yourself and everything magically sorts out. I know it's not that clean. Choosing yourself when you're still in love with someone who keeps pulling away isn't a decision you make once. It's a decision you make again and again, some days with grace, some days through gritted teeth. But here's what reclamation actually looks like in practice. It looks like you starting to hold your own attention the way you've been holding theirs. It looks like noticing your patterns, not their patterns, yours, with genuine curiosity instead of self-blame. It looks like asking quietly, without judgment, why am I so drawn to someone whose distance feels more familiar than someone's closeness ever has? And that's worth sitting with, really sitting with. Avoidant partners develop deactivating strategies because their nervous system learned early that needing people led to rejection, criticism, or chaos. So their system learned that survival meant needing less, handling things alone. These aren't conscious choices, they're automatic. But the person who falls in love with an avoidant often has their own version of this. Not deactivation, but something else. A wound that finds this dynamic familiar. Maybe you grew up having to earn affection. Maybe love, in your early years, was something you worked for, given when you performed correctly, withheld when you didn't. And so the hot and cold pattern of an avoidant person doesn't feel alarming. It feels like the normal texture of love. It feels like home. That's not a flaw, that's a wound. And it deserves the same tenderness you've been pouring into understanding theirs. Now here's the turning point, the one that surprises people every time. Attachment researchers describe what they call the Phantom X phenomenon. Avoidant people idealize former partners or people who have stepped back, precisely because they're no longer a threat. Distance removes the danger, and without the danger, the avoidance attachment system can finally activate. They miss you most when you're no longer reaching for them. Let that land. An avoidant person is most capable of feeling their longing for you at the exact moment you stop giving them a reason to suppress it. I'm not saying this as a strategy. I want to be really clear about that. I'm not telling you to withdraw as a tactic to make them initiate. That kind of manufactured distance is still performance. It's still you organising your behaviour around their response, and your nervous system knows the difference, even when theirs doesn't. What I'm pointing to is something deeper. The avoidant partner needs repeated experiences of safety to rewire how their nervous system responds to intimacy. And that means their partner learning to approach without pursuing, to create space without abandoning, to offer connection without overwhelming. There's a version of showing up that isn't chasing. It's warm but not desperate, available but not waiting, present but not performing. And the difference between those two things isn't in what you do, it's in where you're doing it from. Here's something I think about a lot. In many avoidantly attached people, chronic early stress can make bonding chemicals harder to access. High stress states interfere with oxytocin, that feeling of coming home, of safety, of belonging to someone. When someone grows up where stress is constant, bonding can feel muted, or even threatening, which means the conditions in which an avoidant person can finally move toward you have very little to do with how available you make yourself. They have everything to do with how much safety they can feel without the alarm bells of pressure ringing underneath it, and you can't manufacture their safety, but you can stop manufacturing their pressure. Stage 4 is what I call the arrival, and arrival doesn't always look like what you imagined. Sometimes an avoidant person initiating looks like a small thing, a text with real substance, an admission that felt hard for them, a moment where they reach toward you instead of away. You'll know it when it happens because it'll feel different from the breadcrumbs. It'll feel like something they did despite the fear, not instead of dealing with it. What researchers call earned secure attachment is basically this: rebuilding secure bonding patterns through deliberate, consistent experience with a safe person. Avoidant people who go through this process start showing secure behaviours across all their relationships. They can check in when something's bothering them, ask direct questions instead of assuming the worst, share their actual thoughts without bracing for punishment. That transformation is real. It happens, but it can't be loved into existence from the outside. It has to be chosen from the inside, and nothing you do, no amount of patience, no amount of softening, no amount of making yourself the perfect low-threat presence, can choose it for them. Here's what I want you to understand, and I want this to land gently, because I know how much it might sting. If an avoidant person hasn't initiated with you, it's not because you haven't been enough. It's not because you've loved wrong or said the wrong things or given too much or too little. Many avoidant people care deeply, but struggle with closeness, and that struggle is entirely their own terrain to navigate. The real work, the work that actually shifts something, isn't in figuring out how to make them come toward you. It's in genuinely building a life that doesn't require them to. Not as a performance, not as a strategy, but as an actual reckoning with what you deserve, what you want, and whether what's being offered to you, however warmly it's sometimes offered, is anywhere close to what that actually is. Here's what I've learned, sitting with this in myself and with others. The moment you stop performing for an avoidant person, not coldly, not as punishment, not as a tactic, but because you've genuinely decided that your well-being isn't a bargaining chip, everything changes, not always in them, but always in you. And that change in you, that's what creates the only conditions in which an avoidant person's own longing has room to surface without immediately being shut back down. You can't chase someone into choosing you. You already know this. You just haven't let yourself believe it yet. But here's the quieter truth underneath that one. You also can't weight yourself into being chosen. Waiting, when it comes from fear rather than genuine patience, is still a form of holding your breath. It's still organizing your life around their response. It's still you on the floor of the bathroom, scrolling back through every conversation, looking for evidence that your love was enough. Your love was enough. It has always been enough. The question that actually matters now is whether you're ready to give some of it to yourself.